So initially we were invited to look at organic forms.
We started looking at nature and we went to Jardim Botânico in Lisbon.
So the theme of natural forms really influenced, I linked it closely with my own photography.
Where I used, for organic and natural form, I used the skull.
We were all looking at natural and organic forms.
Organic and natural forms.
Well, when I first started the course, our theme was natural and organic forms.
A course with inorganic and organic natural forms.
We went to the Jardim Botânico de Lisbon and we developed these mixed and media pieces. So
Some of my life drawing over here, which is completely different from that, which is a lot more expressive, especially to the use of inks.
which is important is how life drawing has inspired me a lot. I've been attending to lots of courses last year and this year too.
I found also we're enriched by the life drawing, where I studied the human form in detail. I found it interesting here. What I focused on was more the kind of aspect of identity which the model shows. And in this case, it was the tattoos which fascinated me.
I tried to make my sense of proportion better than it used to be from my previous life drawings.
You have 4 pieces which I did in life drawing.
Personally, I really like, at the beginning we did more paintings, and which took quite a long time. You can see actually how the body moves around.
And I just wanted to put down like the main lines of the body.
Well, that was from life drawing, which I'd also never done before. It was a really nice experience.
Because on the day that I was capturing it, it was a bit windy, and that meant that the picture has an added quality of movement to it.
Well, I think it's because this is my father. My dad was sitting in the car next to me, and every time I looked over at him, he would have these wrinkles, and I was thinking to myself, I've got to capture them perfectly.
And you can see the movement of the leaf, which is, I think, gorgeous, and how the light goes also and shine.
I ended up with this line drawing, which I was very happy with. For this, I was looking particularly at Henry Moore and Dürer, so 2 artists from different centuries, but really capturing hands as a subject.
Painting the hands, which I've already mentioned. I used the very, very dark background, which is typical of Baroque painting as well.
Remembering how God has a presence in nature instead of nature being the focus of the painting.
Big picture, and I wanted to show that in my work, so it kind of inspired me to my work to do photograms, silk screens, linotypes, also collage.
And I had a friend of mine who had recently broken his wrist, so he had a couple of x-rays of that, and he kept it in a folder with all the other x-rays, and he had some of his mum's head. So I asked if I could use them, and I used it for this piece here.
It's from my own imagination, but it was me observing something in my immediate surroundings, which was that in my neighborhood lots and lots of houses had just been left, very luxury houses. They'd just been left and there wasn't a for sale sign on them, but they'd just been abandoned as people had moved out of Portugal in particular because of the heavily publicized economic crisis.
I did the interior and the exterior of the human being, where this is my profile and this is an x-ray. Big drawing, charcoal drawing, and I looked at Emma Sargent first because she's also really fascinated by animals and horses.
It was different and sort of like dark and gothic to me, but humorous. I wanted to keep that. So when doing the acrylic painting, which is here, I added a figure, which is again me, with a different type of skull.
I looked at Max Ernst, who was inspired by his own traumas. And because in this shell, the shell which I photographed initially, I kind of wanted to express a trauma I experienced with the ocean. It was a fear when I got sucked in by a wave.
In different tones. I was working in monochrome, and basically I worked from edited pictures on Photoshop.
Inspiration to become more ambiguous in this kind of way, and I developed from that the ink piece, which you can see next to it, which I call Generations.
And when we were given the opportunity to move in a direction we wanted, I decided to use this image with a viewfinder.
Geisha Wanderer, and the Geisha Wanderers, it was more like a study to show the evolution. As you can see, the people standing in the paintings aren't relevant because they're backwards.
If I did a busy background, it would distract the audience from the focal point. These photograms together is by the use of string, which draws. This string in this piece works as a drawing technique, which was influenced by Man Ray.
I decided to use an element that's personal to myself, which is the school behind it. So that became the main piece of my prints that are here. And then I thought it was like, I added the hand in these prints because I thought it was too empty at the beginning.
These pots here, they were based on a lot of research on Grayson Perry. So I looked at how he constructed pots.
Daphne and Ophelia. Oh no, yeah, this one. I have called Daphne and Ophelia after mythical characters or a character from the play Hamlet.
This idea of trying to do a 2D based drawing with wire. So I did that eagle where we can see the curl, which kind of just roll into to create the shape of the wire.
So I used only two colors, green and blue. Green on one side in the background and blue on the other, and then on the foreground I did the same colors but reversed.
I came up with it in the train where I just saw a car and decided randomly that this would be what I wanted on my piece, but as a skull as a car.
Ideas of this kind of nightmarish feel, which obviously also converged with my theme, to create these compositions.
Directly linked with technique, I looked at Luc Tuymans and Gerhard Richter, in the sense that especially these two paintings here are directly linked to Gerhard Richter, as he paints directly from the photograph, even if it's worn off, even if the colors are tarnished, even if the picture isn't in a perfect state, he paints what he sees. So I decided to go back to Nicola Hicks and use her technique this time, also full scale, but using her technique of the big lines and the charcoal to create this drawing. This drawing was really important, and I did it the same way she does, which is to then do sculptures. She makes them as a studies, and I then move to the sculpture. It's the monkey is exactly the same, and I use the same source.
This icon was made as part of my studies for my extended essay, which I concentrated on religious art and especially iconography.
I really like Chuck Close because he motivated me to work better and more, look into detail. I use different amounts of wax for different purposes. For example, I put more wax on the side so the viewer is brought into the picture.
Which was a fun process because as a DT student I like making things, and this was an art project, but I could relate to DT quite a lot.
Test piece for this, it cracked, it broke even before it went into the kiln, but that process of doing one quite slowly and not very skillfully was really essential in me working well in these ones.
I cropped the composition to kind of, if the painting would be at the eye level of an audience, they would sort of become a part of this moving crowd. But because of the perspective which is thrown more at the homeless people, they would pay greater attention to those people.
Afterward, we didn't know how to do really the wings with only wire, so we had this idea of using paper and wire and just make feather and overlap them to create this very voluminous work.
I decided to do an animation because I had a series of images moving of my own horse. I put together my photographs in a more bridge.
The name of it is Handbags and Milk Cartons, and that's not the first thing that strikes you when you look at it. The first thing that immediately strikes you is actually what it says, and what it says is want versus need. And I was really addressing the consumerist element of the world that I live in, where people actually don't know what they need, but are constantly focused on what they want.
And here I have my family photographs. When I was looking at them, I thought of Singer Sargent's angles were in his paintings. I thought of body language, I thought of interesting compositions.
I have some a mask that is called Brunca masks, and some other artworks that are lizards with different patterns.
This piece I felt was quite interesting looking at other cultures, because I looked at, for example, the bust of Nefertiti.
Don't approach creation, but instead of being Adam and God, it's the mother and child. And in the creation of Adam and God, the fingers are not touching themselves, because you can see the tension, and as God is someone so much more powerful than humans themselves, they can't physically touch. But in my approach, the mother touches the child because it's something human.
And then in Photoshop, I use different filters to see like a green filter and a blue filter, which shows different areas on it.
In my generation, it wasn't a shock that we were all part of a database, but for instance, my parents, they were a bit shocked by it, and that's why I made this piece of an embryo with an escape key. It's called "You're part of a database, get over it."
And I never thought that before the IB I would take art, maybe after in college, or do something with art, and now I'm certain that I am going to do something with art.
First of all, I did a couple of test pieces on how to give color to it. I used acrylic paint for this piece, lino, a plaster cast of the lino itself. So here where we would see this would be sort of like a negative of that one.
In total, I feel I really grew throughout the course because of the techniques I've tried, because of the experimentation, which wasn't always successful, but it forced me to think in alternative ways, and research was really helpful in kind of finding a different method of approaching the ideas and creating the ideas I wanted.
And I think that overall this reflects the themes of spirituality and everything to do with me, and it's very personal to me. And I think
overall, I would say that the course has really helped.
In my day-to-day life, I actually see how geometry applies to everyday objects and like structural. For example, in architecture, you can see that. And from what I've learned in the 2-year course of the IB, you can actually do art without having to be in an art room.
My work has been essentially about the grey area between things of really understanding issues or just passing a judgment on them. And it culminated in my last piece here, which was essential for me to complete the course because it conveyed the essence of like my struggle within this theme of freedom and liberty, which is the boundaries between right and wrong, between good and bad. White, which is often associated with innocence and angel-like beings, wasn't necessarily the right thing, and black wasn't the wrong thing, and that's where we're going to end.